Okay, well, we're working with the European Students' Union. My name's Mike, I'm the Director of Devolved Nations and Internationalism, and what that means is provide different support for the staff teams that support the officer teams in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. Also take charge of our international relations. What I do today is take you through how NUS on your behalf works with the European Students' Union, and I'll explain the work that they do on our behalf at European level. So really what we're going to be talking about today is I'll introduce you to our international engagement strategy, how we are seeking to work with student organisations on a global basis. Have a look at some decision makers on the European scene and who they are. I'll then take you through what the European Student Union is. I'll talk about what it does and to some extent why it does it, and then give you an idea of some of the current collaborations that we are going through. Before, I thought it wouldn't be a seminar that I ran if I didn't have some kind of history involved in it. And really, the reason I'm doing that is just to explain where this organisation came from and why we're very much involved with it. Now, as you may know, NUS was founded in 1922, and it wasn't founded because it was felt that there was a great need to represent students to the government of the day, but it was rather because students wanted to be represented at a thing called the Confédération Internationale des Étudiants, and you can see the logo there in the left-hand side of the slide. Now, it's a French initiative by the French National Union of Students, UNEF, and what it was aiming to do was bring together futures of the world, as they put it, in the wake of the First World War. And part of the logic was that if the world met together, discussed things, came to know each other and understand each other, that would prevent a Second World War. Obviously, that part of the mission failed, and I'll try to explain why. And that in the student world, what we're effectively doing was mirroring the creation of the League of Nations in the aftermath of the First World War. But what was in there was a strong focus on practical cooperation, and particularly NUS got involved with coordinating student travel. So that making sure that ordinary could travel to any part generally of Europe, because obviously the rest of the world was somewhat expensive for them at that point. And one of the very first tours that NUS organised was a mountaineering tour of British students and German students to go mountaineering together and sing songs. And in fact, there was a book published called the Anglo-German Rucksack Songbook, which I have in the office if anyone wants to see any of the songs that people sang when they got up to the top of the mountain. The initiative to develop the CIA broadly failed. And it failed mainly because the organisation refused to take any kind of political stance. The US at that point, in the 1930s, were very concerned about the rise of totalitarianism. And the breaking point came, or two breaking points really. First one was whether or not you should let the Germans into membership or not. And the British initially, after the war, were very much in favour of that happening. Incident was when there was incidents of anti-Semitism in Romania, which the organisation, the CIA, refused to condemn. And so at that point, I said, right, we're going to withdraw. During the war itself, there were a number of student leaders who are now in the military of their various countries, some in exile, gathered in London, decided that they would create an International Students' Day for after the war. Now, this is not a day for international students, i.e. people studying abroad, but it's International Day of Students, if you get that distinction. And the day was chosen was the 17th of November, and because it was on that day that the guy in the black and white photo there between the logo and the brochure for International Students' Day, Jan Opletal, was executed by the Nazis when they invaded Czechoslovakia. He was the leader of the Czech National Union at that time. So just then, we formed a thing called the International Union of Students. And of course, there's a great deal of desire to cooperate just after the war and to really get with other people. But very quickly, unfortunately, Cold War politics intervened. And eventually NUS pulled out in 1951, say in the face of Soviet and Chinese invasion. And formed, along with the Swedes and a number of other national unions, another mission called the International Student Conference. So these Western and Eastern, if you will, national unions continued for a while until in 1967, the International Students Conference, which was one of the ones I had founded, was found to be funded by the CIA, and so people were outraged and the organisation collapsed. And then equally, although the IUS and everyone knew the IUS was funded by the government and there was a lot of KGB involvement in it, it particularly lost credibility with the Soviet invasion of Czechoslovakia in 1968. And so student leaders in the UK at that point said, well, a plague on both your houses, they're not going to join any other international body. And that was the situation for quite a while. Increasingly, sort of during the late 70s, NUS started to go up to what were called board meetings, which is where different European Union students would just meet and discuss things. But again, they came to be very, very much dominated by the Eastern Bloc at that time. But this was also a very good experience for student officers at the time, because they were one of the very few people crossing the Iron Curtain to conduct business. So it was a useful developmental experience for them. Hang on, just go back. So in 1982, we finally came in from the cold, along with a number of organisations, what was called the Western European Students Information Bureau. So as the name suggests, this didn't yet include people from beyond the Iron Curtain. The purpose of that was not, as the previous student internationals had been, to develop policy and come to a conclusion. It was purely to exchange information and good practice and to help each other develop. And that continued for a number of years. And time as the wall came down in 89, but in 1992, WESIB had become ESIB, the European Students Information Bureau. And quite an exciting period of time, which I personally was involved in. What we were doing was bringing in new national unions of students, because until the student unions beyond the Iron Curtain had been state-run, that were forming and coming to grips with being involved in politics and everything else. So it was quite an exciting time. And eventually, this evolved into the European Student Union, and I'll explain during the course of the presentation how that came to be, but primarily because once there was a need for an advocacy role, this is something that we all agreed should be done. We move on now to sort of NUS UK's international strategy, and this is distinct from the work that we do with international students, but of course there is from time to time a good deal of crossover. And the vision, as you can see there, is that by 2022, NUS UK will be working collaboratively with partners at a global level to influence international decision makers on education, social justice, sustainability and peace. Students, student officers and student union staff will be engaged in activities that will achieve our objectives in these areas, as well as enhancing their own personal development and cultural understanding. Student organisations will be seen as part of the solution to global changes, and their commitment to positive change and collaboration will stay with them throughout their lives. So that's what we're trying to create in sort of doing the sort of international relations activities that we do. And we're probably doing that because all futures indicate that education and higher education in particular will be more globalized. It will be multinational. It's already transnational. And employers are very definitely saying that they need students and graduates who have a global perspective and are at ease working with people from a range of different cultural and religious backgrounds. So for a whole host of reasons, that is the way that higher education is going. Including within the college sector, there are international courses developing. I was at the opening of Glasgow University College's new site yesterday, and they are definitely positioning themselves as the international leader in maritime education. So that, of course, is very important within the higher education sphere. As you'll see, we've split our work into 5 key areas. First of all, working with the European Students' Union, which is what I'm talking about, but we also seek to work with partners in the Commonwealth Students Association, an organisation called the Association of College Unions International, which is an American body which is largely of staff professionals, but there's lots of crossover in the work that we do. Developing and maintaining international partnerships and collaborations, so that's particularly for new business. My colleagues in the sustainability team have a number of partnerships that are of a global nature. Students take on sustainability issues. And finally, of course, we've got solidarity and human rights, because it doesn't take much for a message to a group of students in struggle from the National Union, but it means a lot to that National Union if we were to do that. And part of the reason that we have this international strategy is the logic that we believe that we can achieve everything on our own. There are all sorts of things that don't stop at our borders, and we will increasingly need to work with other national unions of students to solve problems together. We're really involved in some work around an international collaboration group, which was started by the European Student Union. The idea of that is to get live contacts and a hub of education. So we need help, we can get it. And more to the point, if there are collaborative partnerships that we can get involved with that may or may not attract funding, then we can also get involved in that. So that's the strategy as such. So let's move on to the next bit. So here's some of the decision makers at a European level. Now, I'm going to go into great detail over the European landscape, but it's important that you know who these bits are. So you can see there in the yellow, you've got the European Parliament. So this represents European Union citizens and is directly elected by them. And it's also able to pass European-wide laws. In terms of the relationship, say, with the UK or other countries, there's this principle they call subsidiarity, and the idea being that the European Union will only do those things that it makes sense to take across the border. Now, obviously, there can be a debate and dispute about what makes sense beyond the border. So, for example, the mobility of people is not something necessarily here in the club that an individual government could or should decide on. Because if you accept the principle of free movement of peoples, then that's the principle. However, as we know, the current governments are somewhat against that, and so see how it plays out. But the European Parliament consists of directly elected people from British constituencies. So at the bottom there, you've then got the Council of Europe. The Council of Europe is considered representative of individual member states that are able to pass laws, but those laws have to be agreed by the European Parliament. Equally, anything the European Parliament agrees has to be agreed by the Council of the EU. Now, you get one of those interesting bits of narrative that is particularly in the UK political domain, is that all of this is very undemocratic. But if you think about it, the European Parliament consists of people that have been directly elected by citizens. Now, obviously, you question the percentage-wise of voters in taking part in those elections, but they are elections nonetheless. Of course, the Council of Europe, the people sitting around the table at that council are indeed the elected representatives of the government of the country of the day. So generally, the Foreign Secretary of the UK will sit on the Council of the EU and initiate laws and activities in that same way. He's the European Commission. So this represents the interests of the EU as a whole. Again, it's able to propose legislation, but no legislation can be passed unless it is agreed by the democratic bodies. Now, the European Commission itself consists of commissioners, and each commissioner from each country. So again, our democratically elected government will select a commissioner to act on the UK's behalf to sit on that body. Now, you've then got a couple of other bodies, which you've got Council of the EU, you've then got the European Council and the Council of Europe, and this can be somewhat confusing. So let's try and pick them out. So the Council of the EU, as I've explained, consists of the foreign secretaries or a nominated person from the elected governments of the country. The European Council is the heads of state of the European Union members, and so consist of presidents and prime ministers generally. So, for example, the Queen doesn't go, but David Cameron will, but the President of Poland probably will go and be represented at that body. And then the other body is the Council of Europe, and this is a body that looks after, it's an intergovernmental organisation. It focuses very much on human cultural diversity, racial prejudice and intolerance, and particularly has a role in overseeing the European Court of Human Rights. So again, when we're talking about a referendum on EU membership, people often say, oh, we want to get rid of the agreement around the European Court of Human Rights, but actually we could leave the EU and still be part of the Council of Europe. We can detach ourselves from that as well, or we could detach ourselves from that and still be in the EU. But again, I think it just goes to show how sometimes European activities be represented or simplified to people. For example, if you take the example of the European Commission, often on News 24 on the BBC, you'll see the Secretary of State, for one of the Secretary of States for the American government, being grilled by a panel of people. They'll go through that process, and this particularly is on TV once a new president has been elected, and we see the scrutiny that the Commission has come under. That process happens with the European Commission, but I don't remember ever seeing it on TV in the UK. So it's interesting that we're far more interested in what's happening in America than the scrutiny that European Commission has come under. There's another area, another body which is nothing to do with any of these, but still exists, is the European Higher Education Area. So this is an aspiration to have a unified and mobile Europe when it comes to educational qualifications in HE. And it's called the Bologna Process. You'll see that the red brick building there on the city is Bologna University. It's the first university in Europe. That's the old. And there was a conference there in 1999 which created the European Education Area. And the purpose behind that was to develop qualifications that were comparable, compatible, coherent. So the idea would be that you can start a program of study at the University of Applied and move it to the University of Bologna and then finish off at the University of Strasbourg. And you should be able to move around very, very easily, and there should be a level of equivalence and compatibility and comparability between the qualifications that you have you are studying from country to country. This is the latest process that was launched in 2010. So it is hoped by 2020 that they will have achieved this aspiration, although, as we'll see, it's not necessarily at a pace that people would want. Also, one of the options is to create this student mobility, and the aspirations of the process are that credits should be comparable, as I've said, that student finance should follow the student so that they are able to study where they wish, and that the period of time for study is compatible across the whole of Europe. Now you'll see on the map there, all the countries coloured in green were until several months ago the members of the European Higher Education Area. The two significant areas, so you got one next to Russia there, that's Belarus. A tiny grey area just above Greece, Kosovo. Both those countries have now successfully applied to be in the European Higher Education Area. There's a lot of debate about whether we should let Belarus in because there are concerns around their academic freedom. So for the first time, the European Higher Education Area, and again we were part of this process as I should explain, demanded that Belarus have a roadmap to see positive moves towards accountability, transparency and democracy within their education institutions. The European Student Union, because it's through the European Student Union that we speak to, can influence what's on in the European Higher Education Area. First of all, here are the members of the European Student Union. Again, there's a map there. You'll notice that Greece is grey. That means there are no members in Greece because there isn't a national union of students in Greece at all. There are student organisations, but they're all linked to political parties, and that makes them ineligible to join the European Student Union, which is based on national unions. The blue ones, so I think you've got Albania there and Turkey, they are candidate members, so they have applied to join, but they go through they have to go through a study visit, several study visits, in fact, to show they've got a credible source of finance. And then and only then will the board, the European Student Union Board, consider them for membership. Ukraine is multicoloured, partially because I think got one national union in membership of two and the other one not. And there is some, obviously, that is broadly between Russian heritage people and Ukrainian heritage people. The other grey bit, I think, just on top of Albania is Montenegro, so they currently don't have a national union at the moment. 47 national unions in 39 countries, and you might say, whoa, how does that happen? Well, because sometimes in some countries there are more than one, and I'll also explain that more in a minute. And basically, through its members, ESU claims to represent 20 million students. Now, you might say, well, of course, NUS has got 7 million, but don't forget most of those 7 million are in fact college students and further education students, and they're purely a higher education organisation. There is another organisation which is in partnership with NUSUK called OBESU, which represents school students and what they might call non-advanced for education. And the office is based in Brussels. So the aim of the European Student Union is shown there on the slide. So it's to represent and promote the educational, social, economic and cultural interests of students at European level, all the relevant bodies, in particular the European Union, the Bologna Group, which is the body that looks after the Bologna Process, the Council of Europe and UNESCO. So they aim to make sure that our voice, the student voice, is heard at those bodies. The VIAV is equal educational and social opportunities in an open and democratic Europe, where students, this is the future, and you can see in that picture you've got our former President Burns speaking on a European panel and contributing to those debates. Demonstrate that we were in at the start. This is the top of the minutes from the founding meeting on the 18th of October 1982, and we are, you can see NUS UK, along with Sweden and Norway, France and Iceland, being the main members of this new organisation, and they were observed by the Swiss, the Finns and the Austrians, and it's got a lot bigger since that time. So just to clarify some of the historical milestones, so as I explained before, 1989 the Berlin Wall falls and Wested becomes ESSED. In 1999 the Bologna Process is created, and because they've got various subject areas of the Bologna Process, ESSED creates various content committees to start looking at how students might intervene. And then in 2001, the European Student Union was taken on as a formal stakeholder of the Bologna Process. And from that point onwards, really, they had a very strong chance to influence the action that the Bologna Process was taken. And this is our seat at the table, if you like. So we, through the European Student Union, express the sort of policy aims and objectives that we would like to see. That they will articulate that on our behalf. So 2007 was named as the European Union, that it now had a representative function. So in 2012, the phrase, I'm not going to all of them, but I want to say some for national union, I suppose one. And theft, and there will be speaking, partner organisation is VS, and VS are a Dutch-speaking, Flemish-speaking organisation in Belgium. The reason why they are separate is because there is a separate Flemish Ministry for Education, a separate French Ministry for Education, so the logic there for there to be. If you then look like is SIL, the Finnish, one of the Finnish National Union students, and then three, at least four, in fact, a national youth. SIL represents what you might call liberal arts universities, and then lower down you'll see an organisation called SOC. SAMOC is what we would call technical universities, what we call politics. And they also have an organisation called SACI, which represents apprentices, and that's it. So those organisations have defined the work that NUS needs to take. Also, sorts of decision between level VB, liberal arts, and ISO, which is technical. Although historically and over the years, that was kind of a right-left split there. We have 5 national unions, 2 of which are members of ESU. So UNEF is seen as the campaigning on the streets, agitating one, and FARGE see themselves more as moderate about clubs and societies and student activities and things like that. So you can recognise the activities that NUS seeks to support. In countries, these things are separate. Talk Dutch, and the picture there shows my Dutch colleagues there from both national organisations. They get on very well together. Actually, interestingly, they play very well, in as much as LSV can be the cop on the streets, while ISO are the good cop talking ministers. The combination of that activity, which NUS successfully combined in one organisation does quite well for them. The other organisations like the Students in Ireland, the Danish Student Federation, the Swedish Federation of Students, and so on, which are one organisation. Only in the Mediterranean countries and the Eastern European countries, you won't get that division between them. The further east you get, though, you do start then to get youth organisations that are, so that it's students and there'll be a separate students organisation, so that sometimes get confusing. But those broadly are the members. A number of associate members who works with. The building there, I think it's the Crystal Palace, I think it is, which is the place where Eurovision was hosted by Azerbaijan. So we were there for a meeting about a year ago now. And sometimes you can equate the European meetings to our traditional engagement with the European student to the Eurovision, in as much as we don't always send our best bands, and the Balkans will vote for each other. But it's very, very similar in many ways. Some of the associate members. So you've got the Association of Norwegian Students Abroad. There's a lesbian gay organisation. NUS particularly has links with IGLIO, which is the International Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, Transgender and Queer Youth and Student Organisation. You'll see OBESU there. There's a network of students of history and related sciences. There's the European Union of Jewish Students, and so on. So there's a whole range of different organisations on the European Dental Students Association, whose last meetings I've met the dentists. But associate members they're permitted to attend meetings and contribute their ideas and thoughts basically from the specialist student groups that they represent. Quite an important one there actually is the Erasmus Student Network, because interestingly the European Commission regards the Erasmus Student Alumni Network as legitimate representatives of students. So there's a bit of dispute right now about who really speaks to students, and obviously we're making the argument that although alumni are, they are not currently students. So the democratic structure of the European Student Union, this is how it works. You will see you've got national student unions there, so NUS is one of those arrows there on the left. And we are permitted to send people to a board meeting. We can send as many people as we like, but we have 2 votes. Everybody has, each country has an equal number of votes. So if you go back to the example of the Dutch, 2 national unions, they will have a vote each, whereas we are able to wield 2 votes. What we usually do in terms of sending a team of people over is, although last year we only actually had 2 people per meeting, is send 3 people so that we can do a bit of a rota. The meetings themselves are extremely long. So it's not an NUS conference where you have a whole bunch of policy put forward and we may or may not get around to discussing it. Everything is discussed, and if it's till 3 in the morning, that's what it takes. And so therefore, a team of people to be able to dip in and out of the meetings and take rest and so on is quite important. So it consists of all the members, as I say, 2 votes each. They then are permitted to discuss and debate policies. So what called internal policies that relate to the running of the organisation, and usually there will be policies that particularly relate to the strategy and direction that we want the officers to take us in. You'll note there that there is then an executive committee, which is elected by the board, and there are 3 full-time officers, sabbaticals in our money, a chair and 2 vice chairs. They office for a year, and they, I think, are permitted up to 3 years in any one. And there's also various other groups. They also have a small secretariat of about 6 people. So again, a lot smaller than us, and mainly focused on expertise in finance and admin, because a lot of the European Student Union structures are funded by European Commission projects, and complexity of managing that finance is quite something. So you've got a small secretariat. We have an ethnic minority subcommittee at the moment looking at issues of race, and particularly now they're focusing their minds on migration and some of the ways in which student groups can help and support people who have been dislodged from homes. There are a series of coordinators who can apply to be a coordinator, and then they are voted on the executive committee. So there's one that deals with human rights, that deals with membership issues, and one that deals with equality issues. And over in the far end there, you've got a quality assurance pool and quality assurance steering committee. This is a pool of students or student staff, people who are connected to the movement who are able to be deployed, international inspections, and our equivalent of ELIA, if you will. So, for example, I think we have 2 British students right now on that. We've got Rebecca Maxwell-Stewart, who's based in Scotland, and Matthew Kitchen, who's a staff member down in Surrey, I think it is. And then coming over the other side, you've got the Commission for Internal Audit, the CIA, see what they did there. And that's a group of alumni of the organisation who take on the role of checking that all the governance and financial procedures are stuck to. So they're kind of like trustees, but not quite the same. So here are some pictures of the people. You won't necessarily have met these people or indeed ever meet them. But you've got there who's the chair, and you've got the vice chairs, Leia and Blauja. So they're from Spain, Switzerland, Macedonia, respectively. The executive committee. So again, you can see the range of countries that we've got there. So Liva Vikmani there from Latvia, she takes a lead in Europe's negotiations on TTIP, the trade agreement. The PROM students have successfully enabled education to be removed from the TTIP agreement. The problem we have in the UK is the UK government's very keen for it to be in the TTIP agreement, because whilst many people are very concerned that American universities will come and set up European countries and act as rivals to homegrown universities and academic institutions, and then start to become more private. Actually, the UK government thinks it's got a chance to become more successful exporting the UK model. So we're at odds with that because we don't agree with TTIP. So Lever's been working very hard on our behalf to get across the student union's view, collective view of the process. You then got Tiana next, who's from Serbia. She specialises in student-centred learning and leads a project. I've got Cristi Popescu here from Romania. I've got Rebecca Stenqvist, who's the former president of Swedish NUS, who's now there. And then the next woman on is Karolina Piatkowicz from Poland, and she is our buddies. So the executive committee assign buddies to each national union, and she's very helpful, and she helps us to participate and get stuck in to these things. Next one is a guy called Victor Grenier. He's from Denmark. He was previously the human rights coordinator, and he did a lot of work with UNESCO and that side of things. And again, he's very global focused and very helpful. And last, you've got a guy called William Bern, who is from FARC, one of the French unions. Here are the coordinators, and again, as I said, they're split into human rights, membership, and equalities. So you've got Patricolo from Italy, who's human rights, Martin Rotella, who's looking after the membership group and what's going on there, and Melanie Fröhlich from Germany, who deals with equalities. So you can see that they've got the sort of offices and things that we recognise, and certainly they've been very helpful over the years in coming us and supporting us in our various activities. So they do. So we got the people, we know how they decide things. The 3 things they seek to do are representation and advocacy. Again, very similar to our own mission, if you like. And what we're trying to do is help do things that it's inefficient for any one national union to get up to. In terms of the core policy areas, it is primarily focused on education and higher education. So it's around purposes of higher education and international policy initiatives. There's a lot of work being done on access and support, which in European speakers call the social dimension. We tend to call it widening access. Then there's public responsibility for education, so governance and funding issue, and that's very much about education being a public good. And they're on that, so that is the reason for it. And now at their core, believes in free education, which was interesting over the years when NUS didn't have free education policy. It was at odds with some of the things that they were doing and couldn't always put our name to things. Then quality and transparency. So as they list their structural reforms, looking after academic affairs, making sure that learning is student-centred, and really promoting mobility and internationalisation. So there's all those sorts of things that all of our students benefit from that they influence on our European level. So first to representation and advocacy, just to talk you some of the things here. Every 3 years there is a ministerial conference of the European higher education area. So all the education ministers will to a city discuss the work plan for the next 3 years. So the one that most recently happened was in Yerevan last year, at that Yerevan conference, a number of issues the US had been pushing for through the European student policy debates became limiting. So we were arguing that greater emphasis should be placed on widening access and dealing with the very poorest students in society to get them into education. We were arguing very strongly for the portability of student finance. So there are other things in the Yerevan Declaration that we all collectively work together to achieve. Interesting, and again, this is where the European Student Union comes into it, is that each country will usually take a student with them to the ministerial conference, but it's a very different experience. So, for example, our representatives last year were Tony Pierce and Bonnie Sanderland, had to pay their own airfares, get there on their own, join their various delegations. I should explain that UK has a delegation that was led by Tony, was her. And Bonnie went from NUSUK Scotland because Scotland has a separate seat because we have a separate education system, significantly different from Wales and Northern Ireland, and that's why they have that different seat. Now, Dutch went over on the King's Plane and came back on the King's Plane with their delegation. So there are different approaches that different countries you quite often see how much they value their students sometimes in terms of getting them there. The key sort of grindhouse, if you like, of the work, though, all the work plans that are set every 3 years are carried out by the Bologna follow-up group. So again, there are representatives from the European Student Union on this follow-up group. So again, our voice can be heard through them. So there are students represented on the board. The working parties that are dealing with widening access, with internationalisation, with structural reforms, reporting, and there are various other subgroups. The ECS one there is all about developing guidance on the transfer schemes and so on. Elements, of course, is representation and advocacy. So European Student Union is represented on the Education Culture Committee, and it's also represented on the Research Committee and Home Affairs Committee. So there's good access there into the European Commission itself. On the European Council, that's where there's a national permanent representation, and ESU often end up lobbying that body. And within the European Parliament, there are various committees. I can't remember. I can never remember all of these actions, but CULT is, as you would expect, culture. Let's see what else. Oh, that's right. EMPL is employment. That's employment and social affairs. And IBE is the Committee on Civil Liberty. So again, European Student Union representatives are invited to contribute to those bodies. And we have some oversight of the European Court of Justice, the European Economic and Social Committee, and the Committee of Regions. So having a permanent presence in Brussels makes it a lot easier for student needs and aspirations to be represented to those bodies where appropriate. These are some of the bodies that we're also talking to at the European level. You've got the Council of Europe there, you've got UNESCO and the OECD, the European Association for Quality Assurance, the European Quality Assurance Research Body, EURASHI, which is basically a representative body for higher education institutions. Then you've got the European University Association. So as you can see, there's a lot of organizations and associations that very much mirror national bodies that we have in the UK. Things like Universities UK, Universities of Scotland, and so on. And also there's an input into business in Europe. And from time to time, each of these bodies might well fund different aspects of ESU activity. And ESU's research and development, again, very much driven by external funding. So first is lifelong learning projects. So ESU will often be a lead partner in these projects and pulling them together. So they've carried out a project called FINST. I should explain that just about all European projects have to have some sort of acronym attached to them, like then to summarize it. It appears on all their financial information. FINST is funding, and they have produced a publication which compares and contrasts different funding models in all the different EU countries. QUEST, which is quality and quality assurance, Sparks in Scotland were very much involved in this project and help the student researchers produce a final product on way in which to engage students in quality processes. SAGE is about employability, and again, there's been a whole series of short pamphlets on how students can maximise their employability skills through engagement in voluntary activity. And one that's very much live at the moment is Pascal, as basically peer-assessed student-centred learning, and that's encouraging European institutions, and that in the UK, to focus on ways in which they can make learning more student-centred, more participatory, and different from the classic chalk and talk model. Our projects are Tempus projects. Tempus was particularly set up to support Eastern European countries with particular development ideas, and one that Europeans are lead partner is ESPAC, which is developing student participation in quality processes in Armenia, and Sparks, again in Scotland. I am right now in Armenia supporting process. I produce a number of publications which you can get on their website. They've got handbooks around quality assurance, student-centered learning and inequalities, but they also produce every 3 years a publication called Bologna with Student Eyes. The purpose of that is to give the student perspective on what they see the Bologna process as having got to and what it's achieved. They've also, as I say, got this Finst compendium of student finance models, as well as the Quest publication on quality. They involved in campaigning to some extent. They will support people in their campaigns. Particularly what they'll do is organise events and stunts, particularly if it's focused around the European institutions, if that is needed. So again, when the European Parliament elections around, they were seeking to have, so they provided suggested text for manifestos throughout Europe. They put on a number of events to encourage students to vote for education. So again, you can see a lot of parallels with the sort of things that we get up to. NUSUK are very celebratory about which I described to you before, the International Day of Students, the 17th of November. So they're doing a push this year around migration and those sorts of issues, and hopefully helping to create the climate whereby institutions throughout Europe open their doors to people for them to continue their studies. They supported in the past Equal Pay Day, and they're very supporters of LGBTIQ. There's a number of letters there, but you'll be aware that there's a number of countries where marches are discouraged or even banned, and so there's been quite a movement which some of our officers have been involved with in supporting those processes. Capacity building, there are 3 main pools of experts, if you like. There's a quality assurance pool, which I described to you before. So that's a pool of students that can be called upon at any one point to be part of an inspection of an institution anywhere. The trainers pool, I'm a member of this, as is Kelly Temple, former women's officer. And again, that's a pool of trainers. If people need trainer, they can call upon them and pay them accordingly. And sometimes the trainers are involved in delivering some of the projects that European is received for. And there's also student-centered learning pool, which is a group of experts that can go and talk to people about ways in which they can adapt the curriculum to be more inclusive and student-centered. And actually, from our point of view, particularly with our priority around liberating the curriculum, this is a really good entry point in which to start talking about that, not just in the UK, but wider across Europe. Because again, if we achieve our objectives of 20% of students being mobile at some point in their academic careers, there's no point in liberating the curriculum here if we don't support efforts to liberate the curriculum elsewhere. Trainings and seminars are organised. You'll notice I've used the word trainings. That's because in the European world, trainings, although it's applicable to us, it's seen as providing training, so that's, I've gone with word. There are educational study sessions. They run 2 European student conventions a year in which a theme will be chosen, and then we'll have various workshops that discuss about that. So that's very much a sort of formative stage of policy making. And then twice a year there is a board meeting preceded by a seminar in which we're able to then hone down and agree policies for a European-wide level. So why do they do these things? As you can see, the red on this map of Europe is the SIP funding. And SIP funding has got, so if you look at the previous map, which I don't have unfortunately, but if you were to look at the previous map, it was slightly better. But interestingly, this is student assess their financial situation. So if you look at state funding for students, then Scotland, for example, will be completely green, and Germany would be green, as would Finland. But the perceptions of students are that they're in dire straits, except in Norway, and I think that's Estonia at the top there, and a couple of others. So the research that is done is very based on student perceptions and how they are experiencing their lives. So I guess the map is saying one of the key things that European students constantly arguing for is should have sufficient money to study and participate in higher education. Here's another piece of showing in access to higher education. So the perception of students there is that Scotland's quite good for it, but things have increased in the UK. Now, this may or may not be true, but the point of the researchers ask students what they think, and this is the result that's come out. But the thing, I suppose, is that we're all in the same boat. In the Netherlands, there's currently a student housing crisis, so they will often talk to us informally and formally. We'll talk to them about what we do at housing and how we approach these things. In Romania, there are question marks around the quality assurance systems there. In Spain, there's, as you'll be aware, there's a massive youth unemployment crisis. Near 50% of graduates unemployed and draining out of the country right now. In Lithuania, you can't talk about LGBT stuff very easily. So again, supporting Lithuanian colleagues there to help move that agenda on. And I suppose it's quite important because it's all about creating climate. So, I mean, when the Berlin Wall fell, and we got those first new national unions came across to join what was then ESIB, some of them weren't exactly tolerant of LGBT issues, but now that has completely changed, and I believe it's that exposure and constant discussion with others that has brought about, helped to bring about that change. UK, of course, you know the issues we have, but in Denmark, they're looking to increase international fees. Finland, they're looking to, I mean, their government recently abolished tuition fees, but a new right government's coming and is trying to bring them back. And of course, all the countries, and indeed the very last European seminar that we had was very much focused around migration issues and how we can all work together to help that situation. In terms of current collaborations, particularly in UK is involved with, as I explained before, Sparks, and to some extent NUS Scotland are involved with that Armenian project around quality. NUS Scotland is directly involved in helping to send national union students in Kosovo. In fact, the picture there is the picture of the Kosovo. That's quite a delicate situation because you've got the situation whereby there's an Albanian majority who are trying to set up the national union, a Serbian minority in the north who, one, don't think that Kosovo is a separate country, and two, don't particularly want to join the other national union. So it's a really, really interesting developmental process to go through to think around how we can bring about a positive outcome in Kosovo. I explained before, there was the EU ministerial in Yerevan in Armenia about the future of the Bologna Process, and the importance of the statement of the future of the Bologna Process is that effectively sets out a work plan, and that is that work plan that goes in and filters into higher education institutions and has to be discussed by them to work out how they're going to do it. So the important thing was getting particularly widely access into the work plan for the Bologna Process. So consequently, everybody across Europe now has to respond to that and work out how they're going to do it. We operate with the Bologna's with Student Eyes project to make sure that we have student input into that. As I said, access is a key thing that we've been working with our colleagues in Europe on. We're looking at liberation work because it's a human rights issue for many, many people right on our doorstep and how we can help there. There's this 2015 development agenda, which has as item 4, access education for everybody. So again, that's working with not just people in European Student Union, but working with the Association and other supranational bodies to try and influence people to bring about positive developments for education across the world. There's a group I mentioned before on international student cooperation. And then you've got the two things there, the trade agreements, TTIP, which could have an adverse effect on education in Europe. And then just generally working on the portability of student finance, issues around biometrics and sort of insistence that we have about students coming to this country and the experiences that they have. And we hopefully will receive some support as and when the EU referendum is announced from our in other European countries. So that's mostly what we set up to. And I guess the reason we get up to it is is the same reason that we hope student unions join NUS. We're doing things on their behalf as a federation because it might be inefficient for any one union to do it. And again, we don't have the resources or the time or the staff to talk with decision makers at the European level, but by affiliating and being part of this organisation, we do by proxy. So, are there any questions? Well, thank you very much indeed for your attention. I hope you found this useful. And if you have any questions at all, you can get me on mike.day@nus-scotland.org.uk. Bye for now.